Revelation 2402. From the 9th of July 1942. Consciously requesting grace through prayer. Not wanting to believe. The conscious utilization of divine grace brings the highest spiritual success. As soon as the human being asks for God's grace in prayer, his soul confesses God, and divine strength constantly flows to a being turned towards God, since without this strength the soul cannot ascend. God, however, wants to pull the spiritual being up to himself and will therefore always be willing to help this spiritual being to reach its goal. The human being may only want to receive in order to then also receive what is necessary for his higher development. But prayer proves the human being's will towards God, and thus every means of help can be offered to him by divine grace, and the ascent is thereby made easy. But people do not make use of the grace they are entitled to. Very often, they do not unite with God in prayer in order to request His strength for their way of life, and therefore cannot mature spiritually either, because the granting of grace cannot take place if it is not consciously desired. Although God's love and grace constantly and indiscriminately affects people insofar as they repeatedly find themselves in situations where they could seek contact with God in prayer, this presupposes faith in a power which is willing and able to help, and humanity lacks this faith and therefore does not desire the influx of strength from a being which it does not acknowledge. But it is easy to believe in this entity if the human being seriously thinks about it. But thinking about it is at the mercy of his will, and consequently the lack of faith is inexcusable. It can never be spoken of not being able to believe, but, rather, faithlessness is a lack of will to believe, which thus also makes the influx of divine grace impossible, because it is not consciously requested in prayer. And therefore the human being who cannot pray is a miserable, pitiful creature who can only be helped through loving intercession so that his mind will change and he will come to knowledge. Through a person's intercession grace can be bestowed upon his fellow human being, yet the use of this is again up to him, for a being to which divine grace would like to flow against its will would also be pushed against its will into a higher degree of maturity which would not suit it. Because the being feels the lack of freedom, thus it feels that its state was changed beyond its will and that this does not signify beatitude for the being. The graces available to the human being are inexhaustible, yet the human being's will must consciously request them. The bestowal of grace without prayer is impossible, even though the whole earthly life is to be regarded as a great grace. For it was granted to the being through God's greater than great love so that it can come close to Him. Yet even this grace can remain unsuccessful if the human being is not aware of the fact that earthly life, the embodiment as a human being, is a grace. If he only values earthly life in a purely earthly way and therefore only makes use of it in an earthly way and ignores all spiritual higher development. Amen.